sometimes what may seem unconventional feels right, and that's okay. I come from kind of an unconventional background. I grew up in a small town just south of Austin called Buda. If anybody's a day student here, you may know it from driving through it to go to San Antonio or San Marcos or something like that. And maybe there's another boarding student here who's from there, who knows. But despite that, both my parents worked in Austin. My dad worked at the University of Texas teaching, and my mom worked in the Capitol. So I would always tell people that I was an Austin kid kind of honorarily, but no, I'm not from Austin, I'm from the country. Growing up in the country was kind of unconventional. Like my neighbors had like goats and cows and ostriches and things like that. So I grew up kind of living a sort of rural life. And so I always kind of kept that with me, just kind of like thinking about like that experience and things like that. But then the biggest sort of unconventional thing that happened to me in my childhood was I got into a very unconventional kind of music, which is traditional jazz. And the way that happened, it's actually kind of a three-generation story in my family. My grandfather grew up in the United Kingdom, and he, in the Second World War, was in the Royal Navy, the British Navy. And during that time, he got to know some people in the American Navy, and they swapped kind of stories and things like that. And one of them was, oh, you should check out American jazz music. And he said, okay, well, who are some of the artists? And they mentioned a trumpet player named Bix Beiderbecke, who, if anybody here likes jazz, definitely check out Bix Beiderbecke. He's like sort of the foundation of any sort of cool jazz and like playing with sensitivity. But my grandfather really liked that music. And so when he returned to England after the war, he bought some records by Bix Beiderbecke. My dad heard those growing up. He liked them. And then when I was a kid, I heard them and I was like, what's that? And he was like, oh, and then told me the lore. So I finally learned about it. And as soon as I heard it, I had kind of a spark, and I knew there was something there for me in it. It wasn't just the music itself, which I found fantastic and interesting and kind of engaging, but it was also the sounds that I was hearing. And chasing the feeling I got from that music and that sound is kind of what started to push me forward. So despite my classmates thinking it was a little bit strange that I was into music from 100 years ago, like, why are you listening to that scratchy stuff? Like, we have great music now. I was like, no, I like this. So it was like that for me through elementary school and middle school at another school in Austin, which I will not name. But when I switched over here to St. Stephen's, which is the rival of said school that will not be named, I finally was around people who were a little bit more like-minded, and I learned some really important lessons here. And I really want to shout out teachers who are encouraging and push you, because although there were some great teachers at aforementioned school, at St. Stephen's, I was really pushed to think outside the box and to follow my intuitions and my dreams, and to be told, you know, if you like that and want to do that or are into that, go and follow that. And there were three teachers, one of whom I know is still here at St. Stephen's because I just walked through his office, who really kind of helped me with that. One was Mr. Moon. Mr. Moon was the orchestra director. He pushed me to really kind of take a deep dive into perfecting my craft on instruments. And I broke my leg playing football here, which ended my football career here, but also helped me really, really kind of hone in on music. And when I broke my leg, it was a couple of weeks before auditions for All-State Orchestra. And so I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to do that. And Mr. Moon said, no. I'm going to get you a stool, and you can sit on the stool. I'll help you prop your leg up. I play the double bass, not a super conducive instrument to having a broken leg. And he helped me do my audition, and I got in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can actually do things like this, even with a broken leg. And when that happened, I went to Dr. Kazanoff, who's the next faculty member I'm talking about. He was the jazz director at the time I was here, and said, why don't we do All-State for the jazz band? I was the first person from St. Stephen's to get into it because of that spark that Mr. Moon had. Then, with Dr. Kazanoff, he was really about, you know, if you have these creative ideas, why not pursue them? Why not try them out? Even if you're just a college or a high school student, why not just like see where you go with it? And so I got together with like a few other members of my class who were in the jazz band, and we were playing and jamming these kind of songs like in each other's like garages and stuff like that. And I thought, you know, why don't we start a combo here of members of the jazz band that plays around town and plays on campus, that plays like more complicated things that we want to do. And Dr. Kasanoff was like, that's a great idea. And he created a space in the schedule for us to do that. Almost all the musicians who did that went on to be professional musicians and play all over the place producing things, including myself. And then the final teacher I want to talk about is Dr. Murphy, who is the Latin teacher here, and he was also my advisor. He was an interesting character. I'm sure many of you remember him, but he was really, really a just brilliant guy and just so like encouraging of his students. And I came into St. Stephen's thinking I wasn't the smartest person. I thought, you know, okay, I can like do whatever I need to do to pass my classes, but I'm not very smart. And Dr. Murphy was like, well, if you don't think you're smart, by the time you leave here, you're going to be a genius. And I was like, okay. And through his encouragement and just like little things like, you know, oh, you should like try out for this competition, or oh, like let me write you this letter of recommendation, or oh, talk to this professor here, or that kind of thing, like send this article. Those little things seem so trivial, but they go so far. And I just kind of followed that, and that's how I ended up getting into college, was doing that. And so when I went to college, I went to Cornell in upstate New York, I brought the lessons I learned from St. Stephen's about being kind of driven and following what you like, even if it's unconventional, and they helped shape my life today. I took the lesson I learned in the St. Stephen's Jazz Combo of, maybe, you know, if there's something I like to do that's not kind of on the map here, I can see if I can make that change. And so I went to the director of the jazz program at Cornell and I said, hey, the 100-year anniversary of the first jazz recordings ever made commercially is happening next year. This was back in 2016. What if we have a group that plays that music? There's no other school that's going to do this, I can guarantee you that. There's no other place that's going to look at this. What if we're that place? I've never thought about that. Let's try it. We tried it. We sold out a theater. It filled like a bunch of kind of after shows and things like that. And then we got hired to play a tour across the country. And when we got hired to play that tour, we ended up playing in New York City and selling out a theater there. So the momentum of just following that spark and going in an unconventional way, you know, oh, I want to play 20s jazz in an institution where everything is about the most modern kind of jazz and things like that. It paid off. And not only did it pay off, but it shaped my life. After that tour, we kept thinking about, you know, what are the things we want to do next? What do we want to do that's big? And I thought about kind of what made the band that we were in itself. And that was the fact that it was a collegiate jazz ensemble. So I said, what if we do a project about college jazz bands? And we started to do that. And using the skills I learned at St. Stephen's around critical thinking and kind of going the extra mile like that, I thought about what is the earliest college jazz band that recorded? And through that kind of thread, I got my first Grammy nomination, just from that idea. And it all can be traced back to Dr. Kasanoff in that building across the kind of walkway over there being like, no, you should try it. So, you know, that was an unconventional way of getting there, but the band did the project. We researched the earliest band, and I published that research in an album. And within 6-7 months, it was nominated for a Grammy, which was just so unexpected. I actually got the call about the nomination during a Zoom class. I had to get on my phone. Excuse me, what? So I took that with me to the next stage of my life, which was living in New York City. I went to grad school at Columbia, and I also played professionally in New York. I lived with a few people from St. Stephen's, believe it or not. Those connections run deep, and I think one of my old roommates actually hung out with somebody here the other day, believe it or not, in New York. And so I didn't really think I would end up there or kind of playing professionally and being around these people who I saw as like heavy hitters. But it really was just from following what felt right to me. And I really enjoyed my time in New York, but what felt right to me after that was coming back to Austin and going to law school, which is where I am now at the University of Texas in my last year. I'm trying to make an impact there in a different way, which is on the environment. I work in environmental law, I study that, and specifically around water rights and water preservation. And once again, I use the skills I learned here to get there and to help me move forward in my life and move the rest of the world forward. So bringing it all back, how do I move forward? Well, I move forward by looking in both directions. I look backwards at the music I listen to, the stories, and what we can learn from them. And that's not just in music, that's also in law. I mean, any kind of law, you have to look at all the laws that led up to where you are today, good or bad. But I also look forward. What is the best we can do with what we have now to present those historical things? And I think a lot about a story that Dr. Murphy, the Latin professor, taught me about how the Latin language itself, which people call a dead language, well, it's not completely dead. And the reason it's not completely dead is in the time after the fall of the Roman Empire, there were small groups of people who could still speak the language in monasteries, these monks and things like that, and they translated painstakingly all of the manuscripts and texts and things from antiquity, helping them to move into the present, using the best things that they had in those moments to make them evergreen. And that's what I try to do with music. Even if these old recordings sound scratchy or recorded, playing into an old horn or an old microphone or something like that, if we use what we can today to make them sound as good as they can, it helps present them for the future and bring awareness to them so that we know about who we are as people and humanity. And I think that's a huge part of moving forward, even if you're looking back. So the last thing I want to say is none of my plan made sense. I'm sure that's probably pretty obvious to a lot of you. I mean, I don't think many people kind of followed 1920s jazz that their grandpa listened to, and that kind of led them to get a Grammy nomination. But here we are, speaking in front of my high school now. And it's okay that none of it made sense. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself and follow the spark inside. People will tell you, you have to do things this way, and this is the only way you're going to get into a good school, or the only way you're going to get a good job. Follow your heart, because you'll be happier, what you create will be better, and it's you. And that's all you got at the end of the day is you. Thank you.